Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I'm starting a new series called Great Cities in History, and I'm basing this off a cool book that I read called precisely The Great Cities in History by John Julius Norwich. Each of these videos will focus on a specific time period because of the importance of a certain town or city obviously changed throughout time. In this video, we're going to talk about the ancient world. The first cities are said to have been based off agriculture. Once humans began to farm, they needed to be in one place, instead of being nomadic and just wandering around. So they built settlements. It's precisely in what is called the first actual city in history that we begin, with Uruk. And if you're a Lord of the Rings fan like me, you'll be thinking of Uruk-hais right now. But Uruk was located in southern Iraq, in the Mesopotamia region. It's interesting that the first city would emerge in a region with so many natural obstacles. They did, however, have the long Euphrates River to keep them alive. It existed for almost 5,000 years and had an estimated 30 to 50,000 people living in it, with organized farming, administration, religion, and their own architecture. Since the region was poor in resources, they mostly traded wood and metals and some semi-precious stones, developing their commerce. It peaked around the time of the rule of Gilgamesh, who enclosed the city in a large wall that span out for almost 9 kilometers. But nothing lasts forever, and with time, the city's importance decreased. Its urban center was populated up to the 4th century AD, but today it's nothing but ruins and dust, lost in the deserts of what is now Iraq. Next, we move a little to the east, MohenjoDaro, located in what is now southern Pakistan. It roughly translates to Mound of the Dead, and it existed between 2500 and 1900 BC. Part of a larger civilization in the region, which is estimated to have occupied a territory of over 500,000 square kilometers. Most of the people seem to have been dedicated to the making of shell, ceramic, metal, or stone objects, which they then traded. They developed a network of water drains to conserve water from the city's many bathing platforms. In fact, one of the great monuments of the city is known as the Great Bath, which was built and made waterproof by combining brick and bitumen, which we still use today to make roads. There is, however, a surprising absence of palaces and royal tombs, leading people to believe that it was a society without hierarchy, or maybe they were just all completely destroyed with time. And time also led to the end of this city, either natural disasters or foreign invasions, or a combination of both. Gradually, it led the people away from the city. However, in the 2nd century AD, Buddhist monks built a monastery next to the Indus River in the region, using old stones and bricks from this ancient civilization. Traveling to ancient Egypt, we have Memphis. What we know best of Memphis are the Great Pyramids. Located at the delta of the Nile, its location was very strategic. It was first known as Ineb Edi, which would translate to White Fortress, later changing its name to Memphis after the expression Men Nefer, which means established and beautiful, referencing one of the pyramids when it was built. But some say that the official name of Memphis comes from the first mythical ruler, Menes. It had a network of temples, palaces, and private homes. Interestingly, it also may be in Memphis that the origin of Egypt's name is. It is said that there was a shrine to Ptah in the city, which was renamed by the Greeks to become Aegyptus, which might have led to the region being known as Egypt. They built the temples with mud brick and limestone, some of which remain until today. Eventually, it was conquered by the Arabs in 641 AD. They founded a city called Fustat, which led to the destruction of Memphis. Today, its territory is mostly occupied by the city of Cairo. Staying in Egypt, we move to Thebes. Here, a wonderland of palaces, temples, cemeteries, and avenues took almost 2,000 years to build. Some of the old hieroglyphs are still present in the giant walls of limestone and granite of the old city. They tell the story of the one ancient Egyptians viewed as their creator, Amun. The native name for Thebes was Wazeh, which translates to place of authority. It peaked in the 13th century BC, over 3,000 years ago, counting with around 30,000 people at most, a small number compared to the 3 million that lived in all of Egypt at the time. Eventually they rose to prominence with a civil war, where their local governors proclaimed themselves as the new leaders, choosing a new pharaoh to rival that of Memphis. One of its greatest temples remains in surprisingly good condition to this day, now being a museum, the Luxor Temple, which at one time was the Roman Empire headquarters in the city. What is interesting about this place is that many of the royal tombs are said to have been built not by slaves, but by educated craftsmen. However, in 664 BC, Ashurbanipal of Assyria wanted to destroy all of Egypt, and so him and his armies invaded and sacked the city. Today, it is the city of Luxor. Next, we travel to the region of Turkey, the city of Hattusa, the main stronghold of the Hittite Empire. The Hittites were a Bronze Age kingdom, which lasted for about 500 years, spreading from Anatolia to Syria. The village from which it was born had been destroyed in the 18th century BC by an enemy king who cursed the place, and as a sign of defiance, one of the first Hittite kings founded Hattusa in that same place. But the Hittites' occupation of this land only lasted a few decades before being defeated, but then they took it back and rebuilt their capital, expanding the city and building large walls with gates ornamented with giant statues of sphinxes, lions, and warriors. In recent excavations, over 26 temples were found, teaching us that it was perhaps a sacred and ceremonial city. Other items like tablets of clay or bronze had inscriptions that show that they were developed in terms of geography, recording history, and even the rule of law. Eventually, the city fell into decay and was abandoned. Moving to a more well-known city, Babylon, the city of the mythical Hanging Gardens. It was known for its culture and education. In the 7th century BC, it reached its peak, then being captured by Alexander the Great, who made it the capital of the eastern part of his empire, eventually dying there. After being founded, it remained undefeated for over 1500 years, being only destroyed by the Hittites, which we saw before this. In its peak, Babylon was the greatest and largest settlement in Mesopotamia, having double walls, a summer palace with an intricate form of ventilation to protect inhabitants from the heat, over 40 temples, the Tower of Babel, an underground crypt with over 14 vaulted rooms, and wells with a developed hydraulic system, a great library, and much more. All this made up the city of the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Some say that the garden portion of the city was built by one of their kings, whose wife was homesick of the trees of her native Persia. Curiously, it was then occupied by the Persians and then the Greeks. The last known document of Babylon dates back to the year 75. From here on out, we get the better known cities in ancient times, like Carthage, a city which grew in and out of importance a few times in history. It was founded in 814 BC, a mix of Mediterranean and North African cultures, speaking Phoenician. It grew based on trading, controlling all trade of the western part of the sea, especially the trade of metals from the Iberian Peninsula. In 146 BC, at the end of the Third Punic War, Carthage was destroyed by the Romans, but it was eventually rebuilt by them too, as an imperial city. This new version was founded around 46 BC, 100 years later. It had rectangular gridded blocks with an orderliness that is even rare in current cities, and a port which was dug into rock in a circle shape, a capital of an empire then conquered by another empire. Moving to the birthplace of democracy, Athens, One could make a video about Athens or really any of these cities alone. The beauty of the buildings, the magnitude of the monuments which last until today, the works of art, and what they represent to the Western world as the origin point for so much of our culture. From the Agora to the Stoa of Attalos, the Temple of Hephaestus, the Parthenon, and the Areopagus. Humans have inhabited Athens for over 8,000 years, and the current native Greeks arrived about 3,500 years ago. It is said that the goddess Athena and the god Poseidon fought over the city, and by the name you can probably guess who won. A city-state, they were pretty much the economic center of the Greek world at one point. Two rivers flowed through the city, the Eridanus and the Ilissus, now blocked underground. They are known as the Lost Rivers. In 404 BC, the Spartans overtook the city. It was then part of the Roman Empire, and so many more ruled the region throughout history. Classic Athens didn't last forever, but some of their ideas, culture, and monuments definitely did. For a change, let's take a look at China with the city of Lindsay. While most cities were built on peace times and eventually destroyed by war, Lindsay is amongst the exceptions. It was one of the cities of the warring states of China, born out of war, a stronghold to represent the power of one of the main armies, in Lindsay's case, the capital of Qi, in today's province of Shandong. Bureaucracy wasn't invented as a concept yet, but it kind of existed in these cities. The government registered all of the people, taxed them, and conscripted them for their army. These ideas laid the groundwork for over 2,000 years of authoritarian rule in China. Even merchants were only allowed to trade in highly regulated markets. Defense was a priority, with both inner and outer walls, to defend a population of an estimated over 100,000 people. However, the buildings were somewhat precarious, relying on mud bricks amongst other perishable materials. Today, the only remains of these cities are small portions of the walls and some ruins of the rulers' palaces. Back to Egypt, Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC, it soon became a major city of the Mediterranean for over 900 years. After his death, it continued to be the administrative center of Egypt, all the way to Cleopatra VII in 30 BC. Only losing its status and power when the Arab invasion of Egypt took place. It was built on a grid, with 2 ports. With many ethnic divisions, it had an Egyptian quarter, a royal Greek quarter, and a Jewish quarter. Off the coast, Pharaoh's Island was connected to the city by the Heptastadium, counting with over 200,000 people. In the center of the old city lays the royal necropolis, with the tomb of Alexander the Great, with the Great Library, one of the greatest lighthouses which became mythical buildings in the history of the ancient world. And that was the Pharaoh's Lighthouse, another of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Moving northwest to one of the greatest cities in the West, Rome, capital of one of the greatest empires that the world has ever seen. There are many legends on the foundation of Rome. The story of Romulus and Remus, who founded the city until Romulus eventually murdered his brother and became the first king in 753 BC, and others who say that it was founded by Aeneas of the city of Troy, who escaped after the destruction of the city by the Greeks. Whichever we choose to believe, there is no denying that Rome was one of the greatest cities of ancient times. At its peak, counting with over 1 million inhabitants, surpassing that of even some cities of today. With 7 traditional hills, the city was spread amongst these 7 and some others which for some reason people didn't count. However, it didn't always have the imperial stone look that we associate with it. For some time, Rome consisted of many wooden buildings, dirt paths, and thousands of small shacks. It was only with Augustus, the first Caesar, that the city became a city of stone and marble, imitating the style of Greek cities. The first building like this was the Theater of Pompey. Then came the Forum and the Colosseum, the Circus Maximum, amongst many others like aqueducts, military buildings, religious temples, and many more. The Roman Empire eventually came to an end, but Rome did not, and still today we are able to visit it. Last but certainly not least, we have Jerusalem. From ancient times, Jerusalem has been a complicated city, the holy place of 3 religions and a source of war and dispute between them all. The most iconic of buildings must have been the religious temple on top of the hill. When the Romans annexed it as part of their empire, they rebuilt the temple, even making it larger. Today, all that remains is a part of the Western Wall. The city was crowded almost every single day, taking in thousands of pilgrims and hosting celebrations for all of the 3 different religions. I guess in a way, you could say that because of its multi-religion aspect, Jerusalem was one of the first truly international cities in history, and religion was crucial to the existence and maintenance of the city itself. It had no direct trade route and no remarkable natural resources. All of its funding came from the outside, in the form of donations, if you will, due to religious devotion. Italian and Greek influence was dominant. In the narrow streets, you could find many Roman mosaics and frescoes. When the Romans tried to further pacify the province and import some of the Roman and Greek customs and traditions, the Jewish locals were not pleased, and they revolted against the foreign rulers. However, the revolt was eventually crushed, and with it, Jerusalem was sacked by the Romans. In Rome, in one of the ancient arches which still remains in the city, there is a painting depicting the sacking of the temple by Roman soldiers, following a massacre of many of the locals. And that is a very brief description of some of the greatest cities of ancient times. Leave a comment below with your opinion or correction, and tune in next time, where we'll take a look at some of the greatest cities of the first millennium AD. Remember to subscribe if you want, and I will see you in the next video.